When I'm talking to companies and I'll say, you need management capability training, your managers aren't quite there. The leaders are going, yes, you're right. Our managers, they're not there. And I'm like, no, that's you. That's you as well, because your managers are role modelling what you are doing.
All of the high-performing clients that we've worked with in the teams, actually that leadership skill set is instilled from day one. So no matter whether they're going to go into a future leadership position, they still have to be effective team players and followers.
Welcome to the How They Lead podcast, hosted by Benjamin Wade and Ben Stocken. This podcast is dedicated to exploring the world of high performance, showcasing examples of how individuals and teams can reach their full potential.
Together, they'll be inviting amazing guests who have defined or represented high performance in their own right, from world record breakers to individuals who have achieved first in their fields. The How They Lead podcast will showcase a diverse range of guests, each with their unique stories and insights to share. So join us as we challenge traditional ways of doing things, explore new ideas, methods and possibilities, and evolve the way people perform.
Perfect. Welcome to How They Lead, our latest episode of our podcast. We're excited to talk to Lucy Kemp today and hear all about your background. And along the way, hopefully we'll identify some nuggets of information which will help people and our listeners be better, whether that's as an individual, as a team, or perhaps to help out their business and improving their performance. Lucy, welcome. Thank you for joining us today on How They Lead.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And also we've swapped out Ben for Jo. So we'll hear a little bit more about probably Jo and her background too as we go through the episodes. But Lucy, what brings you to the show? We're lucky enough to have 30 minutes of your time. What is your background and why are you so unique?
Let me start at the beginning. So I have worked in tons of companies. I'm going to say something very unpolitically correct. I'm probably what's known as a job whore. Not a technical term, Ben, I'll be honest with you. It's someone, and now it's a normal thing. People do it and it's absolutely fine. But back in my day, a million years ago when I was starting out, it wasn't a thing. And I was brought up by a very strong woman who said, if you are not enjoying yourself, you're in control of that. So you can make the change. So if I was in a company and things didn't feel right for me from like a culture point of view or a leadership point of view, I would leave and I would go find something else. So I've had lots of experience in all sectors, big companies, small companies, and I kept finding there was problems in each company. And I worked primarily in internal comms, and that means you get to work across all different sectors of the business. So you can see the problems at every level and every part of the employee experience. And I kept trying to change them, and people kept saying to me, start a group, be part of a group. And these groups just don't work because usually they're just not set up for success. So it got to about 2017 and I realized I was really sick of seeing the problems but not having an impact. So I started my own consultancy and we go into companies and we measure out the employee experience. So we do surveys, audits, we talk to loads of people, we talk to leadership teams, talk to managers and find out what is currently going on when it comes to an employee experience. And this is things, not just the culture, because when we think of employee experience, we normally think of the nice, fluffy things, but it's things like learning and development and career paths and how manager capability and things like that. So I look at where it currently is and I look at where it could be and I help them get there. So that's me in a nutshell.
Great, yeah, I think we can relate to that because we're agnostic as well across all different sectors, and that's, from my personal point of view, and I think Jo's as well, that's the bit that we enjoy, seeing the best bits of lots of different businesses and sectors, and also the worst bits, and introducing that to different clients as well. What might work for a law firm might have never been heard of in a hospitality sector, for example,
exactly.
And taking them backwards and forwards. And I guess we often piggyback off what you are doing. So an employment survey, an engagement survey will be undertaken, and then we come in with the so what and the next steps, often off the back of that survey or the engagement with the employers.
Do you know what? I love it. And I think I love it because I'm really nosy. I love the research part of it. And I've started doing my own research on other things as well. But I love finding out what the problems are and then being part of the solution. Because I think so often when we do a piece of work, we can't see that impact we have. Whereas when I'm working with these companies, I can see the impact I have because I can go to the leadership team and say, these are the problems. And often employees will think that the leaders are just not very nice people. They know that we're having a hard time. They do nothing about it, but the leaders don't know they're having a really hard time. So for me to be able to present it to them and be like, this is exactly what's going on, often shocks them. And I'd always say at the start, we are going to have some very difficult conversations on our journey together, because some of the stuff I have to tell them is horrible. But then it's getting their, almost like that reaction, their buy-in, and then them saying, right, what can we do? For me, that's just incredible.
Yeah, it's really interesting as well, isn't it? When you have that breakdown of communication between the different levels of the business, and having someone external that can come in and do that scoping and find out actually what's the root cause of some of these challenges that are being faced within the business, and then being able to provide that solution.
I love it. And
it's
you really hit on something there. We said the external piece, because sometimes people say to me, but we can just get this done internally. But often for example, if I was sitting internally, I wouldn't want to go to the CEO or founder or the chief people officer and say, this is what's going on, because I have to work with them afterwards. And I will always be seen as that person who almost like ruined the relationship. Whereas externally, I can be as honest as I want to be, because I don't have to. Obviously, I want to keep my clients happy and I want to build relationships, but I am more focused on doing what's right for the employees. So I can be very sincere about things. I'm very honest and a bit braver than I would be if I was working within a company.
Yeah, I think we can resonate with that. One of the most impactful interventions that we see is the questions that we ask before we even meet the clients. So we send out sort of biographies or bios or requests for bios and questions about current challenges or issues they're facing, or how the clients would develop themselves. And we often get quite vulnerable answers back, whereas they wouldn't potentially want to open up themselves to an internal party or to peers and colleagues, but because it's an external independent person asking the questions, they seem to be more open and honest about some of the issues they're facing, the challenges, that we can then tailor the solutions more appropriately.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. That vulnerability piece is absolutely key, isn't it? And when we go into start our programs, like having those conversations about being open and honest and transparent and actually being really vulnerable, I think we can go in and we can ask those really difficult questions that haven't necessarily been approached or tackled before.
Yep.
So to actually get those answers from the questions that haven't been asked internally.
Exactly.
And it's not the norm as well, being that vulnerable. And as we know from the police background and the military, it's all about trust and being open and honest with your peers and colleagues to enable you to be a high-performing team, not just a collective group of individuals. And I think when we're asking those questions from the offset, almost that becomes the norm, to be open and honest and answer those difficult questions, so we can then introduce that into the business as well.
It's a really good point. And weirdly, obviously I'm very, people say I'm very gobby on LinkedIn. I talk a lot on LinkedIn, and I'm very open and honest about what I say. And I talk a lot about my family life and things that I've been through. And I do that in a way because if I'm asking companies to be that transparent with me and that vulnerable with me, I have to give that back. So when companies are hiring me, it's almost that they look at that and think, actually, she's okay with sharing those things about herself, and it makes them more open to do the same.
But I don't think it's a common trait, is it, to be vulnerable and to show that vulnerability in case it's seen as a weakness or a sign that you're not an expert in your field. So it's something that we have to overcome, try out and see what it's like, really, if it's not our go-to or not the norm. And I guess from your perspective, you will have seen lots of different ways of working, what works and what doesn't from a leadership perspective. We were chatting earlier on about how to ask our usual questions, but to somebody who isn't necessarily a leader per se, but has seen the best and worst of many leaders. So I guess Joe and I had a couple of questions just to ask, but I guess your answers will be from the perspective of all the clients that you've had and all the great and amazing leaders or potentially not so great leaders, and what we can give back to our listeners from that perspective.
What are the biggest and most common challenges that you see when you go into these businesses?
So there are two challenges that I can say without doubt will be on my list of almost like, here's where shit's going wrong. Number one is management capability and leadership capability, actually, because often we become managers because we are really, really, really good at our jobs. We're excellent at our jobs. And to get rewarded with that, we are told to carry on being great at our jobs, but here's a team of 10. Now you need to make them great at their jobs and manage them and develop them and coach them and be their best friend. And it's crazy. And then, but sure, if this was going to happen, if I'd been given this extra job, I would expect some form of support, some training, something, and there's nothing. You'd hope so. But every company I go in, there's hardly anything. And I always tell this story. I will always refer to myself as a bad leader. I'm not. I've gotten a lot better than I was, but it's because I've been scarred my first ever leadership position. And I was given a global team of, I think, 9. And I put my hand up and said, I have never done this. I am really scared about this. I don't know what to do. Is there any support? And they were like, no, we don't do that here. We just get on with it. I then left the job within 3 months with burnout. Weirdly, my husband, he's the opposite. When you think of a manager, you think of someone quite warm and friendly. I'm not saying my husband's mean. I'm just saying it takes a while for, him to get to know you and warm up. He was given a team of 5, and they said to him, this is a really, really tricky team. You're really going to struggle. Smashed it. Needed no support. He could just do it. Incredible manager. Companies think everyone is Dan, but actually 99% of people are Lucy. And they don't seem to understand that. And I see that from actual leaders as well. People, especially I tend to work with tech companies and scale-ups. People rise through the ranks very, very quickly. And before you know, you're on the C-level. But should you be there? Do you have that right leadership capability to be there? No, you probably don't. But is anyone going to say that to you? No. Is there going to be any support for you? No. So you've got these leaders and these managers sometimes who aren't leading and managing in the right way. And that ruins the employee experience, because people will always say, oh, employee experience, that's the people team. But actually, employee experience comes down to the managers. And the managers learn that behavior from the leadership teams. So if they're getting it wrong, the manager's getting it wrong, the employees are having an absolutely shit employee experience, or a really inconsistent one. So if you have a Dan, for example, you're going to have a great employee experience. If you have a Lucy, you're going to have an awful one. And that's where it ends up being a bad employer brand externally. And it's hard to hire and it's hard to retain. And the company loses productivity, it loses revenue. It's just not great for anyone. And then the second one is still to do with managers, but it's managing the new generation coming in. Whenever I talk to people, the managers keep saying, God, these Gen Zs, I don't know what to do with them. It's really, really hard. They're so different to how I was brought into the workforce. They push back a lot and they're asking for more things and they're so entitled, they're so lazy. And I talk to Gen Zs and they're like, we hate it here. And they are very vulnerable because they are used to that. We hate it here. My mental health is suffering. There's no one I can go to. Whenever I try and say something, I just get laughed at or told that I'm lazy and entitled. I don't know what to do. And someone said to me that it's like a broken bridge. You've got Gen Zs on one side and you've got managers and leaders on the other. And that bridge is broken, which means there's no great work going on. The company isn't growing. It's just horrible, again, for everyone. But again, that does go back to management capability. Number one, how are we training our managers to manage the new generation, but also setting up the expectations for these incoming generation of people who've never worked anywhere. And also they've come into work through the pandemic. They haven't had that opportunity like we all had to sit in an office. And I know obviously not everyone wants to sit in an office, 100% get that, but sit in an office next to someone and you learn by osmosis. You learn, how to deal with tricky stakeholders, how to run a meeting, even how to phrase emails, how to work with clients, that kind of stuff. That isn't happening anymore. So they're just having a really rubbish time. But when they're raising it, no one's listening. So yeah, those are the things I will guarantee will always be on the list, is those two.
I think you covered some really, really good points there. One of them that you just mentioned was how we upskill those first-time emerging leaders or anyone in the business, and also when, because quite often we are asked to come into a company to support them because they've promoted people into senior leadership positions and they've been there for 4 or 5 years and then they're being upskilled. Was actually from all of the high-performing clients that we've worked with in the teams, actually that leadership skill set is instilled from day one. So no matter whether they're going to go into a future leadership position, they still have to be effective team players and followers. So get them upskilled from day one, ready for future success and growth rather than reactive.
And it's really similar to when I come in, because people often call me in to be like, we've got something wrong with our employee experience. We can't hire. People keep leaving. Something's gone wrong. When really, similar to you, they should bring me in when the problems are solved. They can feel that something's not quite right. So we can stop that problem happening.
Yes.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think, especially for the younger generation that are coming through and they're starting their career, and especially I think we see it more so, as you say, within those scaling businesses where people get promoted very quickly, you're only going to be as good as your line manager. And if your line manager is terrible, they're role modeling the behaviors that you're going to copy. And so if you're unlucky enough to get a terrible line manager, the chances of you but then becoming a terrible line manager as well, are really high, without being given those simple tools and techniques that you can use and adopt every day.
And if you don't know, you're just going to assume or guess. So you've almost got the worst bits of everything, the worst bits of a manager that's influenced you, or potentially if you've had somebody who's influenced you well, then you can take the best bits, but that's probably only going to fill the space of maybe 30 or 40% of what you need. And then the rest is going to be assumptions and guesswork.
I don't know whether you're finding this. When I'm talking to companies and I'll say, you need management capability training, your managers aren't quite there. The leaders are going, yes, you're right. Our managers, they're not there. And I'm like, no, that's you. That's you as well, because your managers are role modeling what you are doing. And I was working with a client, and I even said to him, I was one of these awkward conversations I have to have. And he was like, oh, managers, they're just shit. They're really shit. And I was like, okay, but you did hire them. So you've hired these people. He's like, yes, I thought they were good. I thought they were good, but they're shit. And I was like, why is they shit? He's like, I don't know. I said, but who's managing them? And he was like, oh, God, it's the C-level. They're shit, aren't they? It's them. It's their shit. And I was like, yeah. And I was
light bulb moment.
But who's managing the C-level? And he was like, oh, my God, I'm shit. And I was like, I don't want to say that, friend. I said, but, and I always use the term, the fish rots from the head. I said, if you are role modeling behaviours that aren't great, your direct reports, the C-level, are then role modeling those behaviours to their direct reports. And that's why I said, you have to make a change, because unless you do it, we can spend all the money you want on upskilling these managers. But if that bad behaviour is still happening, that is like wasted money.
I think I've heard that term more often in the last couple of days than I have ever before. The fish rots from the head down, but it's so prevalent. I think
so true.
A lot of business that we work with, we often get invited in by the C-suite or senior leadership team to help improve the productivity or performance of the first-time emerging leaders. And we'll go in and undertake a program of development with them, and inevitably on the first day or the second day, they'll all start saying, "But the problem seems to be the senior leadership team. When are they going to go through this program?" And then by the end of the program, when the juniors present back to the seniors, that's probably the light bulb moment for them when they say, actually, we're effective, but we've grown organically. We've never had any formal training. And there's a disconnect between the language of the first-time emerging leaders and the senior leadership team. You mentioned Gen Z and Millennial, which, again, is really prevalent at the moment. I know, is there some work you're doing on that in the background?
I just released a white paper on this. And the reason...
Good. I didn't want to put my foot in it. I was like, oh, actually, there we go.
The reason behind the white paper was that I was going into companies and there was that whole broken bridge situation. And I was like, right, there has to be an answer. I'm going to go and do some research on it. And the research out there was awful. It was things like they just want a fancy laptop. That's how you sort them out. Or they just want purpose. And all the research as well was pre-pandemic, and pandemic changed everything. It was mainly US, which is a completely different culture. So I thought that I need to find out what's going on. And my clients are generally UK and Europe. So I based it on that. And I've spoken to now, because even though the paper's out, I keep talking to Gen Z people. I've spoken to around 3,000 of them. And what's coming out is fascinating, to be honest, because when I was doing the research, I thought it would be they want really purposefully driven companies who are very politically correct, that kind of thing. But actually what they want is a safe environment to work in, so an actual physical safe environment and psychologically safe. They want to be paid well for what they're doing, so fairly compensated, and they want to be developed. And that's what I want. I'm 42, I'm mother of 2 kids. I want that as well. That's what everyone wants, but they're not afraid to say it. So that's where the difference is. Whereas before, and I've used this example so many times, I had a manager say to me, Lucy, I'm trying to give my Gen Z feedback, and they just keep pushing back and asking for more examples, and they don't really understand it, and can they have an opinion? And they said, I used to go to the toilet and cry about feedback. Why can't they just do that? And I have to say, well, that was awful for us. I used to do the same. I used to go cry in the toilet, and it was horrible. So we shouldn't be wishing that on the incoming generation. As managers and leaders, we look back at what we did and we think that was the right thing to do. And that isn't the case anymore. They are really pushing boundaries and standing up for themselves, and good for them, because that's how the workplace is going to change for the better.
Yeah, massively. And then I think I see far more curiosity in that generation. Mm. They ask so many more questions, so much more intrigue. And as you say, like pushing those boundaries, but I really like it. And I think that our generation needs to see the benefits in what comes with that new generation coming through, and just really learning how to lead better and seeing things from a different perspective.
Well, there's so much innovation and creativity that's untapped by asking those questions and just being open to a challenge. But you have to build that trust, don't you, to begin with, to be open and accepting of that. In terms of, we normally ask about your leadership style then, and this ties into that Gen Z millennial leadership. In your opinion, what leadership style is the right one, especially if the majority of our teams are now made up of sort of Gen Z and millennials? What would you advise?
See, for me, the right leadership style is a leader who is open and who listens. And when we talk about listening, it's like that active listening, because often we say, oh, I've listened, but I'm not. I'm just waiting for my moment to talk. That's what we're really doing. But it's someone who really takes in what people are saying and does something about it. And this is managers, this is leaders. I work with lots of companies who keep saying to me, oh, we know what's going on in our company. We don't know why something's gone wrong, because we know what's going on, because we have these surveys. I'm like, well, what do you do with that? Are you doing things behind the scenes but not telling people? So people are like, oh, I don't trust them anymore because they've taken all my information and done nothing with it. So it's the leadership style that Gen Zs are after. And I will say now that it's been proven that what the incoming generation want, 2 years later, the next generation up want, and then 1 year later, the next generation up want. So it's almost like these are the early adopters of what everyone is going to want. They want transparency, they want a flat structure, they want to be able to go and ask a CEO questions about things and get answers. So that kind of thing. So it is, we talked about vulnerability earlier, it's leaders being vulnerable and managers being vulnerable. So if you want your team to be able to talk about mental health issues, you have to talk about mental health issues. If you want your team to talk about flexible working, you have to talk about it. It's that kind of thing. You can't be expecting your teams to come to you. You have to be really, really open and transparent and honest with them as well.
You mentioned a point there about having to be accepting that someone can come to the CEO and ask questions. So I'm just trying to think whether I agree with that or not, just throwing that out there. Is that the right approach, to have an open door, not an open door policy, but a access all areas anytime with the CEO? Does that not sap capacity of the CEO to then run the business in the best way possible?
When they say it to me, again, I felt like, oh, because my background is, I've never talked to the CEO, oh my God. I mean, I worked in a company once where the CEO had his own lift, so we didn't have to mix with the general population. So that's my memories of it. So again, I'd be like, I'm not sure I'd want that. But this is what their expectations are. And it's not a sense of entitlement. It's just their baseline is different to us. So yes, you're right. Can we have an open door policy? So the CEO is just sitting there answering questions all day? No, we can't. But you can put things in like ask me anything sessions. So once a month, the CEO is there.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Or, the questions at the end of an all hands or a town hall, just so they know. I'm working with a client at the moment, and we put in 2 touch points a month with the CEO. One is the town hall, so at the end of the town hall there's questions, and there's an ask me anything session in the middle of the month. So the employees know that they have that touch point with their CEO twice a month. They know they can go there with their questions. They know they will be answered.
Nice, yeah, and I agree with that. That's the option I was hoping you'd.
Yeah, it's that visibility piece, isn't it? It's huge.
Yes, yeah, and just breaking down those barriers and knowing that actually your opinion is worthy and considered, and that we want those solutions that I might not have heard of, or the CEO might have thought of, and that your input is valid and warranted and needed as well to be successful. It's just some companies don't have the vehicles to do that, like the town halls or those questioning sessions. So what shouldn't we be doing? If you could give like your top 2 sort of pieces of advice, some key takeaways, or just 2 things that some of our listeners could go away after this episode and make a very quick change. So we've talked about the things that we should be doing. What 2 things would you say, right, you shouldn't be doing this in your experience?
So my number one thing, I'll think of my second one, my number one thing that really gets me slightly angry, so I'm probably quite passionate about this bit, is when companies say, we want to hear your opinion. We want to know exactly how you're feeling, but they don't allow people to do it anonymously. And I have lots of clients who don't let people do it anonymously. And they say if people are brave enough to ask a question, then they are brave enough to put their name against it. And if you have created an amazingly psychologically safe culture, 100,000% that is the way to go. I really do agree with that. However, let's be honest, most cultures aren't 100% psychologically safe. And if you are neurodiverse, if you are an introvert, if you are a woman, it is extremely hard sometimes to put your hand up and ask a question. And that means that companies, some of them are doing the best things and saying, Lucy, we've got this data and we're making recommendations on it and we're saying to people, this is what we're doing. That data isn't right. because it could make up probably 40% of the company. And there would be women there, or people who, like I say, were neurodiverse, who are like, you're not doing anything for me. Why aren't you doing anything for me? And it's because that data's wrong, because they weren't given the opportunity to put their thoughts or feelings or questions forward. So the one thing, even when the company are doing it right and asking for the feedback, the thing they're doing wrong is not leveling the playing field by giving that anonymous option.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something at the moment I'm working with the companies actually to try and find a way to implement platforms that do allow for that anonymity. Get it right. I got it wrong the other day in a panel discussion. So that if people want to put their hand up and say, I think this is how we should do it, great, go for it. But if you really have an opinion on something and you don't want to put your hand up, there should still be a way for you to do that.
Yeah, that links back into the conversation we were having earlier, doesn't it? Around that actually feeling comfortable and empowered to be asking those difficult questions in front of someone external. And when you don't necessarily feel that same way when these discussions are internally. So I can absolutely see what you're saying, Lucy, and I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I was just thinking from some of our clients what they do, and I can't think of any, apart from having anonymous feedback forms, but something like anonymous chat where you could actually log on and speak to the CEO, but anonymously, because quite often when you do it anonymously, things get taken out of context and you can't actually work out the intent. Whereas if you could have an anonymous chat, you could have an open and frank conversation, but you're protected from the fact that you might be able to work out who it is, but I think it'd be a good first step, because then you can clarify things and have that chat, but you don't know who the person is.
Afraid of trolling. They're like, we're going to be asked ridiculous questions and it's going to be awful. We can moderate that. That's fine. You can go back and say, that was a slightly ridiculous question, or that was rude. And I've seen it happen before, and I've had to be that moderator at times and work with clients. But on the whole, it's saying to everyone, you can all ask questions now, as opposed to this select few can ask questions, and then we'll just model the culture based on them.
And I think as a CEO and the people that we work with, would you want to be afraid of being asked those questions? Because if someone's thinking it, then more often than not, a lot of people are probably thinking it. So you need to address it rather than hide behind your.
And sometimes it just takes one person to ask that really difficult question to open the floodgates for everyone to say, well, I'm feeling this, I'm experiencing this. Yeah. And that's when you know there's a real challenge that needs to be dealt with.
It's a really sad example, but unfortunately it's not uncommon. There was a situation where there was an inappropriate situation with a manager and a young woman who worked for him. And she was devastated by it. And she came to me and said, what should I do? And I said, you need to raise this. Unfortunately, the manager was friends with HR and said, I don't really know what to do. And I had to find someone you trust. You've got to first off write it down and then find someone you trust and raise the issue, because the company needs to know what's happening. After she came forward, 6 other women came forward, and now it's being dealt with. So like you said, it's that one person being brave enough to do it. And they didn't have anonymous feedback or anonymous tools there. So she had to be brave. But imagine if they did have anonymous tools. There would have been a question around, would she have reported it? Of course she would have reported it. But it took her a long time to, build the courage up, because it was her doing it.
Yeah. And if she didn't have that opportunity with you to have that discussion there and then, that situation could still be going on with more and more victims of that behaviour.
It's a little bit like that first follower principle, isn't it, that we dig into on the programme. Actually, the first person isn't always the risk taker. It's the next person who then stands up and backs that first person. But then once you've got the second person, that's the momentum, and then the floodgates open, and then you can see that you've got the issue, and you can address it. But if you can't address it, then it's just going to be an issue bubbling away, and then it will bite you. Well, there's some. I think we could talk in a lot of depth about those two topics, especially the Gen Z millennial, being slightly older. Obviously, you're not, but I'm slightly older. So it's not new, but it's fascinating, and the fact that actually it's probably not that much different. We just have to be more accepting and open and understanding.
Exactly, and like I said, I thought I would come out of it with some shocking insight, and I did come out with a shocking insight. And the insight is that when it comes to women, we haven't evolved as I thought we would have done. And when I was looking at the data, something that really struck with me, and again, it's going back to managers. When I asked the men, what would you want as a manager? They were like, I want someone who's really going to push me and get me to the next level and help me develop, basically get promoted, get more money. And I said to the women, what would you want? And they said, I want someone really empathetic. And I was like, whoa, this is really, I was expecting exactly the same across the board. And I said, why? What happened? And they said, because if I have caring responsibilities, I need someone who is going to let me go to appointments, let me have time off work. Do I need flexible working? So I said, are you going to give up your career for caring and have an empathetic boss? And because companies are not going to support you. And some of them said, yes, I would give up my career, which is heartbreaking to me because women feel like they're not supported. But a lot of women said, no, I would give up the caring. I won't have children, or I won't have them until later. And again, our birth rate is declining at a rapid rate anyway, and companies not supporting or not really training managers to support their people to have caring and careers is actually going to do society a lot of damage, as opposed to it just doing damage to the people who having to make that choice. So I think that was the most shocking situation for me. I looked at it, I was like, I can't believe we are still here. That when I was having my kids 10 years ago, I was having to make these decisions. My mum did the same. And I have a daughter, and I'm like, I don't want me to be having these conversations with her in 20 years' time.
Yeah, you raise a good point, and it's one of the tools that we deploy almost immediately when we start supporting a business. And I think it spans all the generations that we're talking about, but it's understanding the motivating values of the people on your team. Because we come in and we ask, like the senior leadership team, what do you think the individuals are motivated by? And there's normally the pay rises, promotions, money. But actually, when we ask those individuals, it's like, no, it's adventure, challenge, health, family, well-being. But we've gone down the wrong route immediately by assuming we know, and we haven't actually asked. It's such a simple question, but I'd say 9% of the time it isn't asked.
It is. You look at benefits,
but it's so simple.
Well. Benefits are one size fits all for most companies, and it shouldn't be, because I'm not going to want the same benefit as someone who's 23 just coming into work. Well, they are going to want, and I always make a joke about, you don't want pizza on a Thursday and drinks on a Friday. They probably do. They were probably really up for that, and I was. I remember I used to work at Skype many years ago, and it was just starting, and it was all about drinks on a Friday and pizza on a Thursday. I loved it. Now I don't. Now that is not for me. So it's how we work with companies to personalise not only their employee experience, but the benefits and things like that. So it works for everyone at every stage.
Yeah.
My wife's quite a good leveler. She always reminds me to think about the time when I was 20 years younger and what I enjoyed about a business, and not just assuming that now I'm 20 years older, they will also enjoy it, or other people enjoy what I enjoy now, and to think, put myself in their shoes and think, what was it that motivated you to turn up to the office or socialise outside the office, but what excited you and made you passionate? And just don't forget about that. I think, would you like to ask the West Peak question, or do you want me to delve into it?
You go ahead.
So I think
it's your favourite.
Well, we've covered like the leadership styles from your perspective. We've gone down the Gen Z, millennial rabbit hole, and we've talked about challenges that you're facing with your clients. And I think we've touched on the self-leadership, followership, and teamship. So I don't think we need to delve into that. But I would like to ask the West Peak question, which hopefully you've heard of or listened to some of our other episodes. But whether in our personal lives or business lives, we strive for that pinnacle in our career. We think we're the best of the best, or we've reached the highest point that we can. We get there only to see that actually there's a second hidden summit. And that's why we named the business West Peak, because there's often another area of development that we can look to, that false summit. So have you experienced that in your personal life or your business life, or seen it elsewhere where actually we've been blinded by reaching the summit only to see that actually there's a second one hidden away and we've got a lot more to learn?
It's a business one, actually, or a career focus, actually. I always wanted to be a director, and I don't know why, but in my head, I was like, get to director level, you've made it, that's it, get to director level. And this was that leadership position I spoke about earlier where I burnt out. And I was made a director in this scale-up company, and it was a really big position, and I was like, yes, everyone's going to be so proud of me, it's amazing. And I was in there and I was like, oh shit, I don't think I like it. I really don't think. And it's because, again, I had this team come under me, and working in a scale up at that level, you get lots of responsibility. You wear many hats, and I was wearing a lot of hats. I mean, at one point, for some reason, I was head of IT. I don't know why. And people would message me and be like, I'm computer broken. And I'd be like, have you tried turning it off and turning it on again? Like, no idea.
Have you restarted?
The limit of your technical ability.
I had no idea what's going on. But I could not get rid of that director. It was in my head, I was like, this is the pinnacle. This is what every career step you've ever made, Lucy, was to get you here. This is it. And then I realised that actually this was not making me happy. I was not having an impact. wasn't enjoying it. My home life was suffering because of it. And I'd stepped out of consultancy to take this role on because it was such a big opportunity and it came with so much I wanted to do. And I realised that no, for me, actually, it is, I would rather have an impact in helping clients than I would the job title. And even though my whole life, I was like, once you've got there, you are set for life. It made me realise, no, for me, and we talked about values a second ago. For me, the promotion and the job title, those aren't values that motivate me. My values are making people happier, really, and making sure they're having a good time. And selfishly, again, making sure my kids aren't going to go through what people go through now at work. So I want to be able to look back and for my kids there, we have a great time at work, and me think, oh, maybe in some really minuscule way, I may have helped that.
I like that.
I love that.
Yeah,
I really love that.
That's great. And just, it confirms the point about we shouldn't assume, we should ask, especially when we're looking at like the Gen Z millennial leadership styles as well as upskilling ourselves and those around us. Don't just assume we have the knowledge and the skill set. Ask and then support them as soon as and early as possible, I think, for future success and growth.
And I think it highlights the point when we were talking about values earlier about reassessing what our values are. And I think those huge milestones in life, like when you've had children and your life takes a different path, like reassessing what those values are. And for you, what can I give to my children as a result of the work that I do now? It's not about the job title anymore. My direction's changed.
That 40 minutes has flown by, and I know I don't want to keep you, but just as you were talking there with Joe, we had a guest on recently who was in a similar field, but he looked at employee wellbeing from a coaching perspective, high performance coaching. And he said that since Brexit, he's seen peaks and troughs with how companies are viewing wellbeing. And after lockdown, everyone was thriving, there was opportunity everywhere, and wellbeing was an area that was being heavily invested in. And then he saw people shying away from it, and it almost became not at the forefront of people's attention. Have you seen that yourself?
In a way, yes. I've been quite lucky, and it sounds awful because there's been lots of redundancies and lots of companies not doing as well, which actually means I get brought into those companies either to help them through redundancies, to make sure you do it in a good way for the employees that are going, a good way for the employees that are staying, or to just help the employee experience. Because if you are doing more, which companies often are, with less people, the employee experience has to be so strong because you're putting more onto these people. So the economic downturn, to use a professional term, has actually probably improved my business, which is great because I'm getting to help more people. However, what I am finding is the people teams are so stretched and their budgets are cut so much that they are cutting things like learning and development, wellness, EAP, apps that help people, those things. They literally checklist, what can we take off? And that's through no fault of their own. They are given a budget and it's like, do we keep people or do we keep these services and let's cut the services? So the employee experience is taking a real nosedive because of what's going on. There isn't as much money around anymore. Everyone is very stressed. And the person you're mentioning, the wellbeing person, actually should be brought in now. These are the times where it's really, really needed, but companies just don't have the bandwidth or the budget to be thinking about it.
Which is strange because it's a self-fulfilling circle, isn't it? If you reduce that, then actually it's going to directly impact your revenue and profit because people aren't engaged.
It's hard to get people's heads around that. If you want to make more money, you have to invest in your people. And I always think it's really strange because your people are your biggest investment. And you're almost like, yeah, we won't do anything with them. We're just
biggest asset, yeah.
But your customers, you will put millions into, but your customers won't be treated right unless your people are treated right. So it's exactly,
yeah. And have the skills to treat them right.
It's really short-sighted, isn't it?
So just as a closing note then, do you think that that's the biggest challenge bubbling up on the horizon? Obviously, we've looked to the past, the present. In terms of the future, short or long term, do you think that is going to be something that's going to come and bite us fairly rapidly?
Yes, I do. I think I believe we are coming out of the slump that we were in. Last year was horrible, and LinkedIn everywhere, people made redundant, you had the green banners. I feel that's starting to change, which is great. But what I'm really worried about is that companies are now going to be, right, let's scale, let's grow. It's now our time to do that. And their foundations are just shot to pieces. So they're going to grow in a really awful way and become these big companies that are just horrible to work for and then probably fail. Whereas if they took their time now, and like I said, I know now they will look at it, but we haven't got the money now, we haven't got the time. Now is when you need to do it. So when you do want to grow, you're growing in a really, really great way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a quick reset, a refocus, build that solid foundation, and look forward to future success and growth.
Invest in your people.
There we go. I think that's been a great 40 minutes. Thank you very much for that. We've gone down a couple of rabbit holes. We've got a lot of quick wins and tips for people to go away and instantly try and improve employee engagement and performance. And we've also looked at what is in store for quality companies over the next 6 to 12 months.
Oh, it's been great to have you with us, Lucy.
Yeah, Lucy, I really appreciate that. Thanks for your time.
When I'm talking to companies and I'll say, you need management capability training, your managers aren't quite there. The leaders are going, yes, you're right. Our managers, they're not there. And I'm like, no, that's you. That's you as well, because your managers are role modeling what you are doing.
All of the high performing clients that we've worked with in the teams, actually that leadership skill set is instilled from day one. So no matter whether they're going to go into a future leadership position, they still have to be effective team players and followers.